Hi everyone, welcome back to the Sport Psych Show. Thank you so much for joining me. We've got two guests this week. We have on the line Dr. Mustafa Sarkar and Clara Swedlund. Thank you guys for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us, Dan.
Right, now this is going to be a different one this week with two guests on the line. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get you both to introduce yourselves. Mustafa, how about you introduce yourself to the Sports Psych Show audience?
Sure, so my name is Mustafa Sarkar. I am a senior lecturer in sports and exercise psychology at Nottingham Trent University. I guess my background has been mainly around teaching and research, and probably over the last 10 years or so, most of my research has focused around the psychology of sporting and performance excellence, specifically looking at resilience in high achievers in sport, but also in other performance domains like business. And kind of alongside the teaching and research over the last few years, tried to start to apply some of the resilience research in practice. So done a lot of work with kind of coaches and teams and organizations of trying to actually develop resilience in athletes and in teams. So, that's a little bit about me and the work that I've done so far.
Such a big buzzword at the moment, resilience. It seems to be everywhere, certainly in the consultancies that I'm involved with. And now on to Clara, who is a student, I think, is it at Loughborough University you're at, Clara?
That's right, yeah. I'm currently a master's student at Loughborough University. Mm-hmm. I'm doing the Masters in Sport and Exercise Psychology. I started that in October, and I did my undergrad at the University of Dundee in Scotland, which I finished in 2017. And I think I'm one of the odd guests that you have because, as I said off air, I'm way more into the exercise psychology rather than necessarily the sports psychology side of things. But resilience is definitely a topic that I'm very, very interested in and have applied and read into my own life. So yeah.
Well, absolutely. And I know you got in contact with me several months ago, and you'd written a blog post on resilience that was based on Mustafa's research into mental fortitude training. And that's why I wanted to get you both together, because I just thought the blog post was really interesting. It really broke down some of the key themes into simple to understand structure, if you like. So I thought that was fantastic. And the blog post, in just starting with you, Clara, the blog post was primarily targeting student athletes who you were kind of explaining to your blog audience that, wow, student athletes, they have it really, really tough. It's like you've not just got to do the work, the educational side, you've also got to do the sporting side. And when those two come together, you've got to be pretty resilient. You know, it's tough, it's challenging, there's long hours, there's, you know, your body to look after, your mind to look after. So you wrote this blog post. Is that kind of the reason why you wrote it? You looked around you and everybody's just tired and knackered and anxious and even maybe sort of depressed, if I dare say that.
Well, one of the main reasons I wrote the blog was for part of an assessment that I had to do for David Fletcher's module that he taught on performance psychology. But the reason I chose student athletes is, I guess, because Loughborough University is known for sport. As you walk around campus, it almost feels like you're in an American university, where for every building you've got a sports pitch, which, I mean, I'd never seen, at least in my previous uni at all. And student athletes are such a big part of the student population here, and you see it all the time, especially students that are athletes and that are injured, and just the kind of struggles that they need to go through. And I just thought it was very interesting to see how someone, you know, is trying to manage both the athletic careers and the student careers when, you know, I found it difficult enough to do my undergrad just being a student, let alone managing the difficulties of being an athlete on top of that.
Absolutely, and you alluded to a gentleman there, Dr. David Fletcher, who, as you say, lectures at Loughborough University and was the fellow author of a piece of research that I think you got hold of, a fellow author of Dr. Mustafa Sarkar, who's online today, and you read that piece and you sort of scaffolded from that bit of work for your own blog?
Yeah, that is right. I looked into that main paper, especially because a lot of emphasis was placed on it in our lecture, and I just thought that it was, how would you say it, just a very thorough, in-depth kind of analysis of what it takes to become mentally tough, what things contribute to becoming mentally tough. And I was particularly interested in the environmental factors that I kind of went a bit more into on my blog. So the whole creating a balance between challenge and support. I thought that was one of the main things that jumped out to me, because as someone who's looking to become an applied sport and exercise psychologist, I felt like that was maybe something that a sports psych could maybe contribute to more, rather than like maybe the personality factors that come into becoming an elite performer and being mentally tough. I don't know if most would agree with me.
Well, actually, let's bring Mustafa in here, because I read this article, Mental Fortitude Training, an Evidence-Based Approach to Developing Psychological Resilience for Sustained Success. Mustafa, so you've written this article. The majority of your work is around psychological resilience?
Yeah, that's right. Probably over the last kind of 10 years or so, a lot of my work has looked at resilience, particularly in the context of elite sport. This particular article was focusing on psychological resilience. So this is kind of resilience at the individual level. But I've also started to do some work with colleagues and collaborators looking at team resilience, and also with the PhD student currently looking at organizational resilience. So yeah, kind of looking at resilience at kind of different levels, at the individual level, at the team level, and at the organizational level. But in particular with this mental fortitude training program, was really kind of looking at all the research that's been done over the last 10 years to provide a real practical framework that practitioners and coaches can actually use to develop resilience. And that's kind of where the framework and the programs really come from.
Well, practical framework is absolutely spot on. I mean, I loved, as somebody who's done a degree in psychology and masters in sports psychology. I mean, I've lectured in psychology, and but I must admit, stepping out of academia quite a long time ago, I go back and I read these research articles, and I think I've almost trained myself to move myself away from these complex terms and these complex paragraphs that you confront when you read a piece of research. And I understand why academia does it and has to do it, but at the same time I'm so passionate about demystifying sports psychology for coaches and for players and for parents. But what I love what you and David have done here, Mustafa, is it really is written, in my mind anyway, written in the language, a language that is easy to understand, that's practical, and as Clara said, it's just so thorough. I love the approach that you've taken here, and I'd like to run through it. So you've called it mental fortitude training, and you have a model in the middle of that fortitude training. Do you want to sort of briefly run us through, putting you on a spot here, mate, see how much you know about your own research? Do you want to run us through your mental fortitude model? And we might try and take it bit by bit.
Yeah, if we just kind of take a step back, actually, in terms of what resilience is in the first place. Yep. Because as you said right at the start of the kind of podcast, that resilience has become a buzzword now in sport and in other domains. Yep. And my concern with that and the danger with that is that the essence of the word resilience is now starting to be lost in translation. So, the media, for example, the one phrase that often gets used is the ability to bounce back. And as well, that's kind of come from the Latin origin of the word, but actually resilience in its very, very simple sense is the ability to withstand pressure. And in the context of this mental fortitude training program, the ability to use personal qualities to withstand pressure. And when we're talking about withstanding pressure, we're talking about the ability to maintain functioning. In the context of sport as well, what we also mean by functioning is not just about performance in terms of functioning, but also in terms of well-being. So the ability to maintain functioning, particularly when you're under pressure, because obviously that's where resilience kind of comes into it. And so I think that's kind of in the setup of this particular article. We want to kind of, in real simple terms, explain what resilience is, using obviously all the academic literature, but understanding that it's the ability to withstand pressure, the ability to maintain functioning, and really importantly in the context of Clara's blog, resilience is very much an interaction between the person and the environment. And the reason I state that is because there's now lots of attention being paid to resilience training programs.
Yep.
And those resilience training programs are being, the emphasis is being placed on individuals to do something about their own resilience. Mm-hmm. So there was a great little piece in the British Medical Journal. David Oliver wrote a piece to say that resilience is becoming a bit of a dirty word. He used the phrase, we're putting a lot of blame and responsibility on individuals, and as a result, the environment and the system we're creating around those individuals is starting to be ignored from a resilience point of view. And if you use the example of the NHS, for example, we're putting a lot of emphasis on doctors, but actually what about the system as a whole that we also need to think about? So the reason I mention all of that, because I think that's really important context for the actual framework itself. I think the other thing we also try to talk about is not just what resilience is, but also what resilience is not. Mm-hmm. So again, we argue with that resilience is not this special quality that often people think. It's not this fixed trait that people often use. And I know I'm very, very picky with language when it comes to this, because often people use the phrase resilient, calling or labeling someone a resilient individual, a resilient athlete. Okay. And rather than talking about it as resilient, I rather talk about the ability to demonstrate resilience is like a continuum. You can demonstrate resilience across different types of situations at different times in your life. And I think resilience for me is a very context-specific phenomenon. So I guess, and also the fact that, I think the other myth that is associated with the resilience is that, someone who demonstrates resilience shows no emotion. And is actually, in fact, in worst cases, actually suppresses their emotion. But all the research suggests is that actually those who demonstrate resilience actually experience some really intense negative emotions. They get angry, they get upset, but they're able to manage those emotions better. Not that they don't face them, they're just able to react and respond and manage those better. So I apologize for kind of, to some extent, going through the kind of the basics and the foundations, but I think that's really important in terms of setting up the actual the framework itself and where it's going to come from.
That's actually perfect. And before we do get on to personal qualities, just coming back to Clara, because off air I was asking Clara about what she was doing in the world of sport, and you, Clara, have taken up bodybuilding since you've been at Loughborough. And would you say some of the things that Mustafa was saying there about resilience, the impact of environment, and I don't want to kind of preempt what we're going to go in and talk about, but if we do, that's absolutely fine. But the impact of the environment around you, say, in the gym, and, what's the influence there, do you feel? And also this idea, I love what Mustafa said there about it's not so much being resilient, it's having moments of resilience. It's context specific. It doesn't happen all the time. It's not like suddenly, oh, that's it, I'm resilient now, 10 out of 10 resilience for the rest of my life. It can go up and down. Have you experienced that in your life as a kind of a newbie bodybuilder, if you like?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said to you before, that I competed for the first time in bodybuilding in September, and that was a bit of like a just a trial and error sort of thing to see if I enjoyed it. And in the process, I dieted for 21 weeks and lost about 9 kilos in the process of it. And looking back, it was an absolutely incredible experience. And I always say that the reason I enjoyed it so much is because of the amount of things I learned about myself and about how strong I actually think I am, because in my head, it just translated into so many different areas of my life. So, for example, maybe not to the same extent as an elite athlete, but definitely being resilient in terms of still having to get up every day and do your training and stick to your food plan or your meals or whatever it is that you're doing, and still have that energy and sustained motivation when, in actual fact, I don't plan on ever trying to become a pro bodybuilder, for example. So I needed to find something kind of deeper within me to put myself through that, when I knew that what I was going to get back from it wasn't necessarily something objective. It was more for personal development. And I think of it a lot. So I took a year out from my undergrad to coming to Loughborough. Yep. And one of the reasons I did that was because during my undergrad, I had quite a lot of anxiety, quite a lot of stress. I'm very much overstriver when it comes to academia, massive fear of failure and all that kind of stuff. So taking a year out and doing that sort of process of bodybuilding, dieting, and putting myself through that pretty tough, 21 weeks overall, it just taught me that I can actually pick myself up. I can, as you said, have moments of stronger resilience and perhaps less, but that it is just a build-up process, and that you learn from it, and it is just about becoming better at managing your own emotions in the situation, and sort of looking to grow from the pressure and the stresses that you may be exposed to in one situation or another. So yeah, I can definitely relate to that.
What's interesting as I'm listening to you there, Clara, I've written down a couple of things. That's personality characteristics and psychological skills or mental skills, and the two intertwining. So you talked about getting up early and being in the gym and completing your sets and doing everything you've got to do as I know you said you don't want to be a professional bodybuilder, but you want to be the best that you can be. So that sounded like you were really tapping into the personality trait of conscientiousness, striving to be high conscientious in all you do. And you'd mentioned that previous to Loughborough University, you had been through a period of anxiety, so there was a bit of high neuroticism there, which would be that neurotic stability dimension, which hey, we all have, and we all exhibit on a day-to-day basis and experience on a day-to-day basis. And what I hear you say is you had to exhibit some mental skill to be able to manage that, and then be able to exhibit high conscientiousness on a day-by-day basis. Would those be kind of fair things to say?
Absolutely, you hit the nail on the head, I think.
and so coming back to Mustafa then, I think this brings us neatly, I'd like to think so, I'm going for a really great segue here, okay, onto your model here with the personal qualities. So you say in your article that the cornerstone of this resilience training program is an individual's personal qualities. So can you take us through those personal qualities, please, Mustafa?
Yeah, sure. So I guess what we tried to, or kind of tried to articulate in the article was the fact that personal qualities, we've kind of put it into kind of like a pyramid kind of diagram, with the foundation really of the personal qualities being one's personality characteristics. Yeah. And I'm sure we can have lots of debate about whether or not personality is something that is inherited or whether it's something that can be kind of changed. But we kind of argue that there are, whether or not we like to think about it or not, but there are certain personality characteristics that will help an individual in terms of their levels of resilience. And obviously, from a development point of view, they're probably a little bit less malleable than maybe some of the psychological skills that can be probably more easily developed. Yep. And as a result, we use the phrase of a resilience bandwidth. But the fact that if you're a little bit lower on your personality characteristics, you might need to have a greater bandwidth in terms of developing resilience. Whereas if you're slightly higher on some of these personality characteristics, you might already have that kind of a slightly higher level of resilience.
Yeah, and sorry to jump in, because I got very excited when I read your article, because you referred to Dan McAdams and his sort of three-layered... we're going to get very geeky here, by the way, so just to warn the audience, the coaches who aren't that really into the psychology, although they should be, of course, what am I saying? Really geeky here, because Mustafa, you've talked about dispositional traits, characteristic adaptations, and self-narrative identities, which to me is like, Awesome, love it. But I love what you're doing there is you're playing with personality and playing with mental skills and how they interact and how they collide. Kind of coming back to Clara, you alluded to some of the challenges that you faced. I mean, were you and are you aware of mental skills that you use to be able to manage your personality traits on a day-by-day basis? Are you aware of consciously using mental skills? I don't know whether it's self-talk or attention control or goal setting to be able to manage yourself, to I suppose, exhibit resilience in the moment?
Definitely, and I think kind of going through that process last year forced me to become more aware of, or forced me to develop my own personal psychological skills, purely because I realize the benefit of doing them, and how a lot of the times what you say to yourself or what happens in between your two ears is going to make the difference. One thing that I picked up in June was meditation and mindfulness, and I think that just really helped me with the whole, being non-judgmental or seeing or hearing my thoughts and kind of taking a step back and being able to look at them. So the whole self-talk aspect of psychological skills definitely comes into, understanding and acknowledging when you're not feeling great, and yet being able to take a step back and maybe change your narrative, which is something that Mus also mentioned before. Definitely goal setting. I mean, I strive off structure. I like knowing what I'm going for. I like having clear goals, even if it's, 2 things on a to-do list on a day-to-day basis. That just really helps me. And I always say that I prefer systems over willpower and motivation. So I do try, as I said, and kind of structure my days, set my goals, which, as you said again, helps with my focus of attention. So I know what I'm supposed to be doing every hour, every 2 hours, whatever it is that I'm doing that day. And it just helps manage those feelings and emotions, and kind of stops me from maybe looking at a mountain and thinking, oh my goodness, I need to climb this, and just panicking. And I do think that kind of mental process helps you build that day-to-day resilience, so that when something big does happen, you've kind of had all that preparation leading up to it.
So you love systems and you love structure, and you set goals around. You create a system and you set goals around that. You want to try to achieve this system rather than having willpower and sort of moment by moment motivation, if you like. You just want to have a checklist to be able to tick off and accomplish.
Yeah.
And coming back to you, Mustafa, what I love about the model with the personal qualities is that you separate desirable outcomes from psychological skills from personality characteristics. So we'll have our personality characteristics. There's psychological skills such as Lara's alluded to there, having self-talk and setting goals. And that, for instance, helps her become more committed in the moment, or committed throughout the day or throughout the week. Talk to me about separating psychological skills from desirable outcomes.
I guess the reason, or kind of what we've kind of seen in the literature as to why that's important, is because often when we're looking to develop resilience, we often probably go to the desirable outcome straight away. We often think about wanting to be more committed, wanting to be more confident, whereas actually to do that, it's the kind of the underpinning personality characteristics and the underpinning psychological skills in particular which help us to achieve that. You're actually then addressing psychological skills rather than actually addressing confidence or motivation, for example. What we're going to try to set out with this particular framework around the personal qualities is, I guess, kind of what are some of the foundational elements which will enable you to kind of get the outcomes that you kind of want, rather than trying to tackle the outcomes in the first place.
Great. So breaking down the personal qualities, personality characteristics, psychological skills, desirable outcomes. So coming back to what Clara said there, I like systems, I like structure, I diarise what I'm doing, I have my self-talk, I set my goals, and that helps me become motivated, that helps me be committed. Does that neatly sort of bring to life the personal quality side of this resilience model?
Yeah, very much so, in terms of that kind of example, in terms of where it kind of stems from, personality characteristics, to then that influencing where maybe even the kind of the variety and particular choice of psychological skills. I think often with psychological skills we try to suggest to individuals and athletes to use kind of all of them, but actually sometimes the psychological skills that you use might actually be very much depending on your personality characteristics. Mm-hmm. Even it might kind of offer the specific ones that will be best suited towards your particular personality, and then as a result of the psychological skills, you're likely to get outcomes. And the key bit with the outcomes is we know from the research that we've done with Olympic champions, things like confidence, motivation, the ability to maintain focus. Those are all really, really important outcomes to have when it comes to developing resilience. So you kind of, if you take that kind of step back and take that kind of structured approach, I think it kind of then will help in terms of developing resilience at the core, really.
But what I love about what you're saying here, Mustafa, is it suggests that sports psychology, or the utilisation of sports psychology, is such a craft. It's not an art, it's not an exact science, it's a craft. Because as you allude to be a sporting champion, well, we probably know we want to be confident. We probably know that under pressure, or we want to be able to perform under pressure, and under pressure we want to play with confidence, and under pressure we need to be able to focus, and to accomplish those, it's not just one mental skill, or it's not just all of the mental skills. There's not a set range of personality characteristics. It's that interaction between personality characteristics and mental skills or psychological skills. And then to make that landscape perhaps slightly more complex, we bring in the environment, don't we? And so coming back to you, Clara, you alluded to earlier that you're really interested in environments, the facilitative and perhaps the debilitative impact that environments can have on an athlete, or have on somebody who is exercising. So what taps your interest there in terms of environment?
I'm really interested in the whole social identity, group identification aspect of things. So social psychology, I think, is something that interests like every psychology undergrad. But the whole idea that the identities that we construct and the support systems that we perceive to have around us can have such a massive impact on things such as our mental health, our health behaviors, even physical activity. I just think it's absolutely fascinating, and the fact that environment is something that we can manipulate pretty easily at times, or certain aspects of the environment can be manipulated. I just think it's absolutely fascinating to see how perhaps a team with a certain coach might perform in a certain way, or an athlete with a certain coach might be underperforming, but then they move to a different environment, or something happens in their context that completely changes their game, or their performance. And for someone who's maybe just going to the gym and exercising, how things like social support, or the people that they have around them, the voices that they're hearing around them of encouragement or discouragement, how those can just map on to all those behaviors that they can maybe enhance their psychological skills, help them get to those desirable outcomes, or if they can, flat out, almost like cancel them, just because of how important, at least from my opinion and from the things that I've read, how important our social environment and our group identities can be for us. So I think that's just fascinating.
Absolutely, and that leads me neatly back to Mustafa, and just referring back to your journal article, you say, although psychological resilience is by definition a fundamentally thinking and feeling, so cognitive affective, so thinking and feeling construct, it's profoundly influenced by a wide range of environmental factors. So talk to me, mate, about those factors. What environmental factors, Clara's alluded to some there, but within your model, what environmental factors are you suggesting that really influence psychological resilience?
Yeah, and I guess I kind of, if I take one step back slightly with it, is the fact that for me, even though we've said in the paper that obviously the cornerstone being personal qualities, for me, the environment is possibly, from my experience and the work that I've done with kind of teams and organisations, probably the most powerful and beneficial way of actually developing resilience.
Yeah.
Because I think there's only so much that can be done with individuals, whereas with the environment, there's a lot more beneficial and a lot more potential force for change. And that goes back to the definition of resilience with being a kind of an interaction between the person and the environment. And we've kind of broken down the environment into two very, very simple terms based on kind of all the research that's been done, not just in sport, but in business and the medical profession. And we suggested that the environment or the environment that individuals create, and particularly coaches in the context of sport, very simply is a balance between challenge and support. And I think Clara talks about this in relation to her blog. And based on the notions of challenge and support, so you can have high challenge or low challenge in an environment, or you can have high support and low support in an environment. As a result of that breakdown, we kind of came up with 4 different types of environments that a team or an organisation might be in. All the way kind of from the unrelenting environment where you've got high challenge and low support, to the kind of the stagnant environment where you've got kind of low challenge and low support. So it was and then obviously the desirable environment that we suggested is an environment where there is high challenge and high support. And I think in the context of elite sport, for me, the two environments that are particularly of interest are probably the unrelenting environment where you've got high challenge and high support, and the facilitative environment, because there's a real fine line between those two. And obviously there's been lots of stories in the press around this, around certain sports, Olympic sports, around kind of coach bullying and coach abuse. And that's why we kind of wanted to kind of frame it around that in the sense that you can actually be in an environment where you can develop performance and develop well-being, where there's high challenge and high support. You don't necessarily need to be in an environment where there is high challenge and low support, because that leads to some really negative consequences. And what we did in the article was then break down what these sport-specific environments actually look like on a day-to-day basis. What are these environments actually characterized by in terms of the behaviors and actions of managers and leaders and coaches, etc. So that's an overall picture, I guess, around the environment and what we've kind of put together.
Well, yeah, you say in the facilitative environment that people thrive in a challenging but supportive environment. Individuals have input into and take ownership of goals. And that notion of individuals having input and taking ownership, it sounds quite autonomy supportive. It sounds like the coach's behaviours are so important here. A coach's decision to be more autonomy based, so asking questions of players, taking into account their thoughts and their feelings, actually pushing players to come up with their own solutions, players coming up with their own practices and activities, players creating their own guidelines, their own rules, if you like, their own behaviours of excellence. It sounds to me like coaching behaviour really lies at the heart of a facilitative environment.
Yes, very, very much so. And in fact, most of the work that I've actually done recently is actually explaining and actually going through these environments with coaches. Most of my work around developing resilience in athletes is actually not done with athletes themselves, but is actually done with and through coaches to understand the environment they're creating in terms of autonomy support. So I think coaches are vital. And going back to your point about autonomy support, I think this is where the reason also from the framework point of view why the environment is so important is because the environment then also shapes the personal qualities. So you mentioned about autonomy support. That will help then increase ownership and responsibility and accountability with that. But also going back to the personal qualities, it will help athletes become more proactive in terms of their development. So certainly coaches are vital as part of that process to understand the environment. Firstly, to actually just genuinely understand what environments they are actually creating within their particular setup. And then being able to understand what they can do to potentially manipulate that environment to ensure that you get the better, the most desirable outcomes.
And so, Clara, coming back to you there, I know you've done dance historically where you will have a teacher, an instructor, fellow classmates doing dance. So maybe you might want to talk about that and the environment within dance, because I think that can be highly pressurized. But also, within bodybuilding, you're kind of there on your own, aren't you? Do you get coached? What's that environment like? Does it tend to be like in bodybuilding? And if you're on your own, how do you actually foster your own an environment of support? I mean, I can understand that you stretch yourself, but support yourself, how do you do that within bodybuilding?
Oh, that's a big question. So I do have a coach. I work with him online, but we have weekly kind of check-ins and conversations. So we might have a 10-minute call. I send him a document of how my week's gone, basically, with a few questions that he asks me to complete. And then we have a weekly phone call or FaceTime if we can. And that might be 10 minutes long, or sometimes it goes on to being 40 minutes long. And sometimes we talk about my training, and sometimes we don't talk about anything to do with training at all. So I'm very lucky that I came across an amazing coach who's been very, very good at kind of supporting my needs, and we just clicked very well. We've got the same kind of personality, same attitude of striving, but he's quite a few years older than me anyway, and he just has that ability to kind of rationalize things, and I quite like having that guidance, as I said before, not really having to think about too many things and just going in and doing my training. So he's an incredible part of that support system, and I keep in touch with some of the other athletes that he coaches, or some of the other people who are into bodybuilding that he coaches, whether that be through social media or text or Facebook. There is a kind of community within it, and once you get into it, it's quite a niche sport, so to speak. You just meet people quite easily, and the same names keep coming up. You meet people when you compete or when you train, and even though it is an individual sport, and even though you're kind of comparing your physique to other people's physique, it is so close-knit. Everyone's so lovely and so supportive, because I guess we all know how much it takes to kind of, to get to that level of, say, body fat. It is a lot of effort and quite a lot of sacrifice. And I'm also very lucky that my partner fully supports me in doing it. I've got an amazing group of friends who encourage me to, as long as I'm happy and as long as I'm doing well, to pursue it. So I'm very, very lucky in that sense. I am able to, even if I'm training on my own, to have that supportive environment, maybe not fully directly in the sport, but at least out with the sport that I can rely on.
And in your blog article, which relates to Mustafa's research, you talk about pressure inurement training. And this is a very posh term for getting the balance between challenge and support, right?
Yeah.
It's so tell us a little bit about this. You've done a really cool... we'll give the audience a link at the end, but you've done a really cool graphic on this. So what are the main features, do you think, in terms of getting that balance between challenge and support? How do you challenge yourself? How do you support yourself?
I think a challenge is always, how would you say it? I don't like getting bored. I quite like being busy. So I don't do very well in what you would maybe call a stagnant environment. Yeah. I'm always
setting challenging goals, essentially.
Yeah, something difficult. So when I approached my coach, for example, January last year, I'd kind of been in a rut with my training I mean, I've enjoyed going to the gym for a while, but I wasn't really getting anywhere, and I wanted to set myself a challenge. So I approached him with the idea of doing like a photo shoot. So it's kind of not the same as competing, but you basically get lean and do a professional photo shoot. Because I was at the time thinking, or still unsure as to where I want to go with my career. But within the exercise psychology sphere, I have like personal training qualifications. So I do want to maybe put exercise psychology and personal training together. So I thought, this will be a cool idea. I've never really had to diet myself, but I would really like to work with people who may be struggling to lose weight and kind of the different psychological aspects that tap into that. So I just thought, I'll do this. It's a new challenge, something completely different for me. And then as I was progressing through the diet and preparation for this photo shoot, I just thought, why not compete? Why not give something completely different a go? So for me, that was a challenging aspect. And, part of what comes into that, for example, now, one of the reasons I'm deciding to compete again at the end of this year is because I know that it's going to be challenging to complete my master's degree alongside preparing for a competition in bodybuilding. So it will be once my dissertation has been handed in and all that, but I know that the requirement of me is going to be slightly higher. Even now, I've still got my uni work to do, yet, I do prioritize a lot of my training and kind of intertwining that with being a student and doing a master's course and lots of other things that come into that whole package. I enjoy putting that pressure on myself, and the balance, I guess, is where the fine line is, as Mustafa referred to before, is not putting myself in that unrelenting environment where I feel like I'm biting off more than I can chew, essentially, in layman terms. That I'm thinking, I've got all these deadlines, but I have to do this, and I've got all these other things to do, and I need to get my training in or whatever. So I guess that's when you go back and you rely on your support system and the people surrounding you. And I guess depending on what the challenge is on a particular day, I'll go to one person or another.
It sounds like to challenge yourself, you're setting high expectations, big goals. Mm-hmm. You've got support around you. You've got support through your coach, through fellow competitors, which is fantastic. Mm-hmm. But what I like about what you said there is, I'm looking forward to the challenge of competing. And coming back to Mustafa and coming back to your model here, that challenge mindset, what Clara is saying is, I'm looking forward to this. I can't wait to challenge myself. I can't wait to get out there onto the platform. And this seems to be the final piece of the jigsaw puzzle when it comes to resilience, doesn't it? And I'm gonna go all highbrow now on the Sport Psych Show and quote Epictetus, who said, "Men are disturbed not by things but by the views which they take of them." And we may even throw Shakespeare in, who said, "There is nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so." And both of those are great quotes to demonstrate the importance of narrative and perception, getting into a challenged mindset. And challenged mindset, like Clara alluded to there, Mustafa, is that final piece in the jigsaw puzzle, isn't it?
Yes, and very much in terms of what we kind of argue is that if you're able to optimize people's personal qualities and you're able to create a facilitative environment, you're more likely to develop this challenge mindset where individuals view pressure. If we go back to the essence of resilience, the ability to withstand pressure, this challenge mindset is the ability to view pressure as an opportunity to develop and to grow, rather than pressure being something that's being seen as something that's threatening to someone's well-being and performance. And I should really emphasize here, resilience and the challenge mindset is not just about positive thinking. That's one of the myths that are associated with resilience is it's not about positive thinking, but what the challenge mindset is it's helping people to understand that there are different ways to view a situation. It's not necessarily about always viewing a situation positively, but helping people to understand the alternative ways of how to view a situation, a circumstance, a difficulty, a setback. And a lot of the work around the challenge mindset, actually, we borrowed from the work that the US Army have done. So the US Army have spent nearly over $100 million US dollars on building soldiers' resilience. And they've got a fantastic book which is evidence-based, but really importantly, very practical as well. Very much framed around cognitive behavioral therapy. So understanding that our thoughts determine, our thoughts and beliefs are probably more important than the actual event itself. And a lot of their frameworks is around helping people to avoid the thinking traps that we all have, taking things personally, externalizing, always looking at the negatives rather than looking at the positives. And I know you had previously on Martin Turner, who talks about kind of rational and emotive behavior therapy, very much that kind of that approach. And for me, that's one kind of one real key aspect of resilience is our understanding of kind of our thoughts and our beliefs.
Yeah, it's interesting. You stole my thunder there, because I was going to mention Martin, and as you say, it's monitoring language, narrative, words, sentences, whether they're in your own head or whether they're, noticed through verbal discourse. Having the capacity to do that and just rationalise, as you say, it's not just positive thinking or positive narrative. A truism is that rationality, being able to rationalise your language, is so important, rather than catastrophizing or getting involved in the musts. We must win. I must. As Clara kind of said, I'm looking forward to the challenge here. It's not a case of, I must win this competition, or I must produce this kind of output. It's I'm looking forward to the challenge. I'm going to do the things that are going to help me to perform towards my best. So I think that's important. I mean, I think one of the things I love about what you do say in this piece of research, Mustafa, is that, and this is something that I've experienced time and again at the coalface, is that when you do start to try to help competitors, people, manage their thinking, if you like, whether that's trying to help them rationalise what they're saying to themselves, whether it's trying to help them, dare I say it, perhaps think more positively about the situation. Quite often people find it really hard to manage their thoughts, and they get quite frustrated, don't they, when they can't. And so actually sometimes we've got to pivot and help individuals go, whoa, okay, you know what, maybe I can't shift this language to, or narrative, to a more rational or a more positive structure or frame of looking at things, and maybe it's just about helping them be more accepting of their thoughts and more non-judgmental about their negative thoughts.
Yeah, and then Clara mentioned about kind of mindfulness and meditation, and part of that process is really, really helpful in terms of those non-judgmental thoughts and recognizing and accepting the fact that you're going to have negative thoughts sometimes. And as I said, resilience is not necessarily always about changing negative into positive, but also just even the recognition of the negative in itself is a really, really useful process. I guess for me, there were two things really. Is the fact that challenge mindset, and this goes back to the environment as well, is that coaches can really help individuals develop a challenge mindset by confronting irrational thoughts and just asking really good questions.
Yeah.
Coaches do that as part of their day-to-day in terms of the physical, technical and tactical stuff. But even from a psychological perspective, just asking really good questions that confront the way that someone is thinking can be really beneficial in terms of kind of developing this challenge mindset. The one question that I use kind of regularly, or heard regularly, is there another way to view the situation? And it's a really, really subtle and soft way to help people to recognize actually there is alternative ways. There are different ways to view whether or not you've been non-selected, whether or not you've got injured, whatever some of the kind of adversities that you might face, there's always an alternative way to look at it. So I think coaches have a big role there. And I know we're putting a lot of emphasis on coaches, but probably I can't underestimate their role in terms of the environment that they create and the questions that they ask. They play a big role in developing the challenge mindset. And I guess the other point to mention is that as well as the ability to kind of evaluate how people look at pressure, the other term, and I know it's been used a lot in education, and it is a bit of a technical term, but I'll is the notion of metacognition. So obviously, breaking that down really, really simply, that's just the ability to not only think about situations and pressure, but also the ability to reflect and think about your own thoughts in real time. And I think that's also something that's not been explored hugely is just taking that step back and being able to know what is actually, it's kind of self-talk, a higher level of self-talk, really. Being able to understand that in terms of, your thought processes. So, yeah, as I said, I think it's kind of really important part of the particular framework.
I think metacognition, or thinking about your thinking, meta-affect, thinking about your feelings, meta-behaviours, thinking about your behaviours, it's almost the master. It's almost the master technique, really, because to be able to develop your self-awareness, to self-reflect, to step outside of yourself and monitor what you do or what you've done throughout the day or throughout the competition. I mean, wow, it's just something, if you're capable of doing it, which everybody is, and some are better than others because they've just inadvertently practiced it more. But I think when athletes engage in that day in, day out, without getting lost in that process, I just think that it has such an impact on your ability then to self-regulate, self-manage, and subsequently high perform time and again. I mean, coming to you, Clara, there, based on what Mustafa said, I mean, you've come into bodybuilding over the last year. You're a student. You've got lots to do. Do you find yourself engaged in thinking about your thinking or thinking about your behaviours? And if so, do you feel that helps you self-improve?
Definitely. I think that self-awareness is something, as you alluded to, that you don't necessarily, not everyone comes with it. So it's something that I've personally had to work on a lot. Okay. Because I've always been quite bad to just let something come into my head and immediately almost react to it. So self-awareness and kind of that acknowledgement of, okay, whoa, what am I saying to myself? What's going on right now? And taking a step back. It's definitely something that I've engaged in more so from a student, as a student, rather than necessarily as someone who trains. I think especially because of my, I've always put so much pressure on myself for doing well academically. And, my year out, I told myself and I committed to myself, I said, I won't go back to education unless I feel fully ready to engage in the process and to have that challenge mindset of, I want to enjoy my MSc, I want to progress through my career and take on those challenges and not just be petrified by them. And the whole self-awareness and self-regulation is something that's come up quite a lot actually in the last few weeks in conversations with classmates. I'm the class rep for my class, and I have a lot of conversations with students just to check up on how everyone's doing. And many people are kind of, it's almost like we help each other become aware of our thoughts and cognition. So if someone's having a particularly bad day or they're sort of panicking, and that someone might be me or someone else, and we kind of voice some thoughts or concerns, then there's always going to be someone in the room who's able to say, have you thought about looking at it in a different way? Or have you realized that, in fact, we're all in the same position? Last week, we just started classes back last week, and we had our first lecture on becoming a practitioner psychologist, basically, practitioner skills with Chris Harwood.
Yep.
And when we got sent out our module handbook, it just looked pretty scary, to be honest. Because it's telling us what a lot of us want to do, become applied sports psychologists. And you're kind of sitting there looking at it thinking, I am so not ready for that at all. I am so far away from acquiring all these skills and being able to implement psychological skills training in my consulting sessions. It just seemed like worlds away. But in actual fact, speaking to other classmates, we all feel the same, and we were all sort of able to acknowledge that that's exactly why we're doing a master's right now, that we're here to learn about it. So I think that having that self-awareness yourself and then having a support system within your environment to actually be able to voice those concerns and thoughts once you're aware of them is extremely helpful. And if you're not yet aware that you're having those particularly concerning thoughts, then maybe hearing somebody else who's more comfortable with voicing them, talking about them, can definitely help, bring that awareness within, and realize that you're definitely not alone in those anxieties. And I mean, I guess that applies to competitors in all levels of sport.
I'll just interrupt there, Dan. Sorry, just in terms of the point about kind of significant others or other friends, family, whatever that might be. I think in the article we talk about how individuals might help in terms of thought regulation strategy. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we say is that actually verbalizing and actually confronting some of those irrational or negative thoughts, if you've got someone you trust, it needs to be someone that you trust and someone that you are able to do that. But I think, going back to Clara's point about significant others and using your support to help you regulate your thoughts, often, as you mentioned, Clara, you're often not self-aware of that, and then having other people who either respect or trust to help you through that process becomes really important in terms of developing that change mindset.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely, and it's just amazing, isn't it, how it all pieces together, how that environmental support can help you can improve your metacognition, which then has a knock-on effect to improve your self-regulation. Mm-hmm. And that brings it neatly back round to the notion that, as you quite rightly said there, Mustafa, more and more, I mean, it's the same with myself in my career, and I think I was saying this on a recent Sport Psych Show podcast episode, that as you become more experienced as a sports psychology practitioner, you learn that the environment is so influential. I think so many of us, and it's great that maybe you're starting having a running start here, Clara, and are so into the environmental side, because I think I started in an individual sport where it is all about, or you feel it's all about yourself, golf, and you feel that you're the one who's got to have the mental skill. And yet with golfers, and I'm talking about the elite end now, when we talk about environmental influences, I'm very vociferous now in insisting with a player that I work with their caddy. I mean, as I say, I'm talking about tour players here who will have a caddy, because I think those caddies and the family around the player, but certainly the caddy is on the course with the player, they can be that positive, rational, environmental influence that helps a player be more present with their thoughts and their feelings and their behaviours, and even snap back into where they should be, or snap out of where they are, which is probably or possibly sometimes in quite a dark place on the golf course. So that environmental influence is so important when it comes to resilience. And Mustafa, to come into the home straight here, mate, bringing all of this together, it's a fantastic model, and there's various hierarchical strands there, but sort of from theory to practice, you've taken a lot of this. You and Dr. David Fletcher have taken a lot of this from Olympic Games, and as you alluded to earlier, you're putting it back into environments and speaking with competitors going into the next Olympics or in various sporting disciplines. So how does all of this, we've basically alluded to a lot of how it can work in practice, but how else can it work in practice?
I think for me it's kind of what I would do often with kind of athletes and coaches to start off with is that initial awareness building piece in terms of helping athletes and coaches recognize what resilience is in the first place. And I think for me that is really the fundamental aspect, because if we're looking to develop resilience in practice, and coaches and athletes are actually on the same wavelength in terms of what actions and behaviors might actually constitute demonstrating resilience behaviors, then we're onto a bit of a dangerous kind of territory there. So kind of the first bit in practice is to actually have open and honest discussions about what resilience is and what it's not. Maybe using things in training and competition to actually highlight good examples of resilience practice and maybe some lesser, not as good examples in terms of that. So I think that's, for me, the first part. And then I guess a lot of my work, as mentioned before, probably has focused on the environment and helping coaches in particular, trying to understand where they can kind of shape or manipulate the facilitative environment. Done a lot of work on the notion of psychological safety, helping coaches to understand and appreciate creating an environment where it's safe to make mistakes, safe to give things a go, safe to kind of experiment and take risks. And I guess the other part in relation to Clara's blog as well is helping coaches to understand where they can kind of create that good balance between challenge and support. How can they increase challenge when necessary and do things in training to do that? And similarly, how can they increase, help individuals and support athletes through that particular challenge? I guess for me, one of the key areas, and for me, the philosophy of the framework and the philosophy of resilience training is that my concern is that individuals, with it being a buzzword, people are going to say, well, and I know in football, for example, there are things like the EPPP where you have to do psychology and you get it ticked off. I've done resilience. I've done my resilience workshop. Yep. I've done my resilience training, and for resilience development to work, it can't just be a tick box exercise. It cannot just be about a one-off session. It's got to be something, and particularly environmentally, a shifting culture around certain practices, coaching practices, values and beliefs. These are things that take time. So in terms of the final bit is that there needs to be buy-in from everyone within teams and organizations. There's got to be buy-in all the way from the top of the organization, from managers, chief executives, club directors, all the way down to players. And that includes parents, coaches, support staff. And again, I use the example of the US Army. They had investment of nearly over $100 million US. They had buy-in from, generals and kind of sergeants all the way down to soldiers. And I think for resilience development to be taken seriously in the more long-term vision, we need to that kind of buy-in from everyone that it's important, and it's not just something that can be done as a one-off endeavor.
Mm-hmm. It's an everyday thing, isn't it? And I think integration is the word here. It needs to be integrated into the day-to-day activities and practices that occur on the pitch, the court or the course, and off the pitch, the court or the course, across clubs, across age groups and levels. I really think it's imperative, and I think that this journal article you've done offers a fantastic framework for that. Just to finish off, Clara, coming to you, I know you're passionate about the exercise side of sport and exercise psychology. So again, we've kind of answered the question to a degree, but where does for you resilience fit in from an exercise perspective? How will you be utilising this in your future career as an exercise psychologist?
I mean, I think it's pretty similar to how you would implement it with a coach and athlete relationship, whether that be in a team or an individual athlete. I think it's really important to assess where a person is at in the same way you'd assess a coach and athlete are at, and find exactly what might be challenging for a particular individual in a circumstance. So whether it's someone who's got a chronic disease and maybe, going out for a walk is the challenge, or if that has been managed already, what's the next stage, and really making sure that what you're helping them to do, or what the journey that you're helping them through, never becomes boring and never becomes too difficult that they find that they're slipping back into old habits. And obviously from the psychological perspective, providing that emotional support and maybe helping them build that framework around them to ensure that they have that constant support, really knowing where to draw from when things do become tough, because obviously inevitably things do become tough for anyone, whether you're an elite athlete preparing for the Olympics or whether you're Mary from down the road trying to reduce their cholesterol. I mean, that's just a very, very basic example, but I think that contextually the principles of challenge and support, they apply to absolutely everyone. And I think that most people thrive much better when they get that balance right. Obviously, easier said than done. But having that personal awareness too of, the ability to assess yourself and think, where am I at with myself? Is there something I want to change? What can I change? What do I want to change? And kind of letting that guide your progress and the process that you decide to adopt in order to find what challenge is suitable, and again, what support you're going to need in order to be able to progress through that challenge.
Well, things certainly do become tough when it comes to physical exercise, and I know today I went for a 5k run and it got tough around the 4k mark. Well, I hit the wall. That's how fit I am. 4k and I hit the wall. Disgraceful. And so I used all the self-talk I could to actually see myself home. Look, thank you so much to both of you. That was absolutely awesome, and I think we've actually found a way to do a future podcast with each of you. Clara, we'll have to get you back on talking more about exercise psychology and resilience with relation to that, and Mustafa, it would be great to talk more about team resilience, which I know is becoming, as you alluded to at the beginning of the interview, a big part in what you're doing. And so to each of you, how can people find your work? So Clara, first of all, what's your blog address, if you know it, and how can people find you on Twitter? And if any student athletes want to get some advice from you, how can they get in contact?
I think the best place to find me is Twitter. I don't know the exact link to my blog, if I'm honest. So if anyone wants to reach out or get in touch or just have a chat with me, my Twitter handle is @CE Swedlund, spelled SWEDLUND. I'm pretty active on social media, and I love engaging with the whole psych, exercise, sport community on there. I'm a massive nerd, so I really, really like that kind of stuff. I love reading articles that people post, and just talking about this kind of stuff really excites me. So anyone who's interested in that, feel free to get in touch.
Brilliant. And Dr. Mustafa Sarkar, how can people get in contact with you, mate?
Similar to Clara in terms of Twitter. So my Twitter handle is Sarkar, so MUSSARKAR. I'm on LinkedIn as well, and my university staff profile in terms of an email address. So Nottingham Trent University. I've got a staff profile there as well, so you can find out a little bit more about, I guess, the teaching that I do and the kind of research that I do at the university.
Fantastic. I had a good friend who went to Nottingham Trent University, ended up the captain of England rugby. I won't name names, but he ended up being a fairly good rugby player, certainly a better rugby player than I was golfer. So, listen, thank you both so much, and I really, really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, thinks. So please do get in touch, whether it's via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, and let me know what you think about the Sport Psych Show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm certainly looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.